Quick announcement, there is a link in the description for a new channel where I'm going to post the next worm videos. Making niche videos in the same channel where I do normie stuff is causing all sorts of problems, so if you want to be notified about the next videos in this series, please click on the link below and subscribe to that channel. Thank you, and let's begin. Ukrainian poet Tatiana Shmailuk writes that a childhood of misery is lifelong injury, and personally, I think that's an understatement. Left untreated, childhood abuse or childhood trauma can become a gift that keeps on giving. A child suffering from post-traumatic stress is going to have a harder time forming bonds and is much likelier to find themselves isolated. Growing up without stable, safe bonds means missing out on opportunities to develop social skills, making the gap between them and the normie kids progressively wider. According to the book The Body Keeps the Score, abuse at an early age also makes one likelier to draw further abuse towards themselves, either because the isolation leaves them vulnerable to predators or because they actively seek to recreate that familiar dynamic. The 9 arc builds on the prior points made about guilt, spite, and friendship to make a new point about this vicious cycle, specifically what we can do to stop it, both for ourselves and the people we care about. Arc 12 starts with some of the strongest perspective tension. For us, we've just read through 8 interludes about the 9 and their candidates. We're terrified and excited. Taylor, however, is still riding that optimistic feeling like everything just might work out from the last time we saw her. Taylor is vaguely aware that the 9 are in the city, but she doesn't know how close and active they are, nor how terrifying. This is a really interesting way to position the protagonist and antagonists. Most writers would find it natural to have Taylor be one of the 9's candidates, one of the first to meet them. Instead, she's one of the last. So why is it constructed this way? In other words, what are we getting that we wouldn't get if Taylor was the first candidate? 3 things, from least to most important. First, she's not in the center of things. In Naruto, for example, the Akatsuki come to kidnap the protagonist specifically. Naruto himself is obviously in the center of the action, and the world seems to naturally revolve around him. In Worm, nobody gives a shit about Taylor, even though Taylor is the perfect candidate for the 9. Like with the bullying, nobody pays attention to her. She's not special. Speaking of bullying, the second effect of having Taylor blindsided like this is that it's very similar to her original trauma. Very mild spoiler, Emma's bullying began not when Taylor was at her lowest, but as soon as she started smiling again. As soon as she felt hope. The 9 arrive just as Taylor starts to think everything just might work out. We already talked about getting kicked while you're down, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about getting kicked while you're getting up. It's about squashing hope. Of course, the 9 don't care about Taylor, they care about Brockton Bay, but Brockton Bay is in a similar situation, scrambling for hope. This pattern is very common in Worm. Mannequin lets Collins feel like he's winning as they're fighting for the knife, so there will be hope to squash. What was it that made Sophia try to rip Taylor's ear off? Seeing Taylor kiss Brian, climbing out of her pit. The locker incident happened right after the trio intentionally made Taylor feel like things were finally getting better. This doesn't mean that bullies don't like kicking people while they're down. Also, Taylor was feeling no hope when the trio emptied juice bottles into her hair in the opening toilet scene. For example, Brian's entire personality is built around not letting others beat him when he's down. That's why he can't show any weakness. That's why instead of telling Taylor his true trigger event, he makes one up. One in which he's not the victim. The third most important reason Taylor isn't a candidate is that the perspective clash creates a delicious tension. Taylor doesn't know what's coming for her, and the reader can't wait for her to find out. We're on the edge of our seats to see how she reacts to them. So these are the 3 things that we get out of Taylor not knowing that the 9 are there and active. But even though Taylor doesn't know she's in the midst of the 9 arc, she continues the same thematic thread from the Amy Bonesaw philosophical dialogue in the previous chapter. Taylor is in her hideout making her bugs work together to fold origami. Charlotte watches, creeped out, and comments that bugs shouldn't act that way. I don't really believe in thinking that way anymore, Taylor says. I don't believe in shouldn't, like there are some universal rules about the way things should be, the way people should act. So there's no right or wrong, Charlotte retorts. People and animals should do whatever? Charlotte is already setting up the moral framework for Jack and the 9. She's basically asking, if there is no God, Is everything permitted? Taylor's response to this blows my mind. She says, no, there's always going to be consequences, which is a wild thing to say. I'd expect her to scramble to construct some secular morality, but instead, Taylor says that the consequences are all that matters. But consequences for whom? As if it isn't clear enough that this is a continuation of the last chapter, Charlotte, out of nowhere, says, are you going to tell me there's a situation where rape is okay? Taylor's trauma and isolation made her suck ass at reading people, and so she narrates. I would have thought I'd touched on a hot subject if her voice wasn't so level. But it is a hot subject. In Charlotte's interlude, we're going to find out that she was sexually assaulted. Boom! Perspective clash. The author is begging you to remember that everyone around you might suffer from trauma that they're hiding specifically because they don't want their vulnerability to draw more abuse. At the same time, the author reminds you that we're all dealing with different facets of the same philosophical problems. I gotta change gears. We can't keep discussing each detail like this. Please remember that every chapter has several moments like this, and all you gotta do is look for them. After this dialogue, Taylor goes around her territory to make sure people are getting what they need. I'm going to skip this entire thing except for one interaction. While Taylor uses her bugs to clear a house of a rat infestation, the head of the family starts verbally abusing her, even saying that he would have physically attacked Taylor if he could. Worm, like the Old Testament, is a book about how hard it is to get people to cooperate. And the reason it's so hard to get people to cooperate is because people are ungrateful cunts. Sometimes. There's a line in Exodus that I love. After Moses delivers the Israelites from slavery, they escape to the desert and soon see that the Egyptian army is chasing them. They turn to Moses and say, why did you bring us to the desert to die? Were they out of graves in Egypt? 3,000 years, and it sounds just like my mom sounds today. Brian comes over and tells Taylor that Hookwolf is calling a meeting that very night to talk about the Nine. Later, the Undersiders take a boat through the lake that Leviathan created in order to meet on top of a submerged building. This is such a cool detail. It's so easy to write a superhero story and just forget about the consequences of a superhero fight, but the writing in Worm forces you to feel how hard the city was hit. Representatives of every large faction in the city arrive, the Pure and Fenrir's Chosen, the Merchants, even Miss Militia and Weld representing the heroes. The Travelers pretend to be unrelated to the Undersiders and Coil, who is also there. They are all there to discuss the terms of the truce that they'll put into effect to fight the Nine, but Hookwolf blows things up right away. He points out that the Travelers and Undersiders are spreading over the city and claiming territory as individuals, while in reality it's a conjoined effort. He claims that the Travel-siders are planning to take over the entire city, which is true, but also claims that they are going to take advantage of the Nine's arrival to betray the truce, which is unfounded. Hookwolf proposes that the Travel-siders leave the city until the Nine are gone so they won't conquer more territory, but that will obviously render their territory forfeit. This proposal doesn't make any sense, but except for the Travel-siders, everyone agrees that it does, including Coil. They insist that the Travel-siders leave, thus isolating them. This isolation is going to play an important part in the abuse that the Travel-siders are going to be subjected to very soon. But before we get to that, I want to pause here and talk about how Hookwolf isolates them, because this is a very interesting block in the philosophical statement about indecency. Let's backtrack a little. As I'm sure you all remember from a fucking year ago, we defined decency as putting aside individual goals in order to cooperate and achieve a common goal, like fighting a common threat. Indecency is betraying cooperation in order to advance one's own goals. Worm develops this idea one step at a time. The most obvious example of indecency is Armsmaster betraying the truce to try to kill Leviathan. Everyone who is aware of the details knows that the truce was betrayed. The next step shortly after is Amy messing with Taylor's head in the hospital. Amy pretends to be decent, but in reality she's taking advantage of the fact that Taylor got injured for a common goal. Amy is indecent while pretending to be decent. Another development is Bitch carving the names of Brutus and Judas into the memorial obelisk as they too died fighting Leviathan. Bitch was extremely decent, sacrificing two of her favorite beings in the world for the greater good, but was mistakenly accused of indecency by the man holding a baby. So we had three stages here: obvious indecency, indecency disguised as decency, and decency mistaken for indecency. As a progression of this, Hookwolf is now intentionally accusing the Undersiders of indecency, even though he knows they're decent. He knows they were there against Leviathan. The rest of the villains, including Coil, side with Hookwolf and agree to kick the Undersiders out, leaving them alone against the Nine. Now, here's what makes it really interesting. Hookwolf is using the bigger threat of the Nine in order to get rid of the strongest group in town. The act itself is indecent, which makes it hypocritical. We're going to see a lot of hypocrisy in this book. Feeling defeated, isolated, and bullied, the Travel-Siders go to Ballistic's hideout to make the best of the time and discuss strategy. They talk about the Nine's abilities, which there's no reason for us to get into except for that one bit where they discuss chess and shogi. Trickster compares the members of the Nine to pieces of chess. The Siberian is like a queen because she's strong and maneuverable, while Jack is like a king. Not very strong, but if you take him out, everything falls. The fact that Trickster thinks about chess is beautiful. Taylor and Lisa would never use that analogy. Why? Because chess has symmetrical information. When two people play chess, both of them have perfect knowledge of the board. The game is won by the player that positions their pieces better, which is exactly how the Travelers fight. Think of the battle with the Wards. The Travelers positioned Sundancer and Ballistic so that they could suppress the Wards, and not only did the Wards know where they were, it was crucial that they know so they won't actually get killed. It's the same thing when Trickster leaves Missy to hang by the neck, forcing the Wards to save her. The whole trick is dependent on both sides having complete information. Now, compare that with the Undersiders. At the bank, Lisa lies to Glory Girl, saying that she's telepathic. In the banquet, Brian makes sure the majority of the heroes are blind. In the dog shelter, Taylor uses a bug decoy and pretends that it's a form that she can change into to terrify some Nazi Jungen. A game like chess must seem really dumb to them. I can't really think of a game that would be similar to the way the Undersiders fight. I want to say Stratego, but maybe poker would be more accurate. Aligning herself with the way Trickster thinks, Taylor brings up Shogi, another game that has perfect information. But Shogi has one important property that chess doesn't. It allows you to capture the other player's pieces and place them on the board as your own. This shows to a lesser degree how Taylor thinks about combat, that the strength of her opponent can always be used against them. I'm putting this here not just because it's a really cool way to show how characters think, but because it hints at how people get used to playing certain games, which is going to be a recurring theme. The Travel-Siders come to a conclusion. They're going to use Regent in order to hijack Shatterbird or Burnskar and use her to fight the Nine. Satisfied with the plan, the Undersiders turn to leave. The reader is led so gently into this feeling like we're about to see the Travel-Siders prepare. We expect to see something like a training montage of Taylor fortifying her defenses and briefing her minions, but instead, boom! Jack, Siberian, Bonesaw, and Cherish are waiting for them by the exit, blocking it. This is a book about trauma, motherfucker, and this is what trauma feels like. My main motivation in analyzing the Nine is trying to understand how to write villains like this, myself, and this is my first boon. The villains should fit the story. Worm is a story about trauma, and the Nine are trauma incarnate. But Worm isn't a book about all kinds of trauma. It's not about car accidents, it's not about being bitten by dogs, and it's not about house fires. It's specifically about the relational trauma of knowing that you're suffering for another person's amusement. The first thing that Jack says is, "This is not an exit," referencing the novel American Psycho like a fucking nerd. Which is the point. The Undersiders might die right now, but Jack's goofing around. I don't really need to point out the parallels between Jack and the protagonist of American Psycho, do I? Both of them live in a godless world where everything is permitted. Bateman, however, feels a sort of terror at the meaninglessness of it all. Does Jack? For now, we don't know. Lisa responds with kudos for the reference. Trusting interpretation, she has actually read this book and recognizes the line. This trusting interpretation, her power extrapolated from Jack's smug smile that he's doing a thing, and Lisa's pretending to be better read than she actually is. And so, we already have the first interaction between the Undersiders and the Nine. Lisa is subjected to the same dynamic that we've seen in the Nine's interludes, being completely helpless. The foils have been set in advance, and so the reader naturally compares her reaction to those of Elle, Colin, Amy, Dina, Theo, Bitch, and Alec. And what is Lisa's reaction? She's complimenting Jack, in both meanings of the word. She's playing his game. Jack says, "All these meetings and we didn't get an invitation. almost enough to hurt our feelings. And Lisa responds with, "Can you blame us? We were talking about how to kill you guys," getting a laugh out of him. Taylor, similarly, just slips back into the same role that she had in school. She's used to being stepped on, if you will, like a bug. Her trigger is a single acute event, but before and after the locker, she lived like a vermin for more than a year. She had time to adapt, and so she's more adapted to this situation than any of the others. Brian may have been beaten badly, or maybe even attacked in a more intimate way, but for most of his life he was being treated like a human being. He doesn't know how to process the 9, and besides muttering the occasional "bastard," doesn't really do much. Same for Bitch, who may have been raised under conditions of constant abuse, but she never really understood her abusers, unlike Taylor, who had always known Emma. Alec also grew up under abusive conditions, but his adaptation is mostly internal, being emotionally unaffected. His role in this interaction is interesting. Like Lisa, he seems to be going along with it. Even when he asks Jack about the test Cherish had to go through, Taylor and the reader aren't sure if he's trying to bait Jack or if he's just curious. I don't think he knows either. Effectively, it's only Alec, Taylor, and Lisa who actually give Jack what he wants, which is engagement. We don't know Lisa's trauma yet. It could be that it was similar to Taylor's, or maybe it was just that her trauma made her really, really good at reading people. I remind you once again that all of these adaptations exist in the real world, and you know people who adapted like this. People who are comfortable being stepped on, people who show no weakness, people who simply don't understand other human beings and so depend on dogs for emotional support, and finally, people who are unaware of their own emotions. The last one is a real-life disorder that I only recently found out is called alexithymia. Look it up. Everybody knows that Worm is a book about trauma, but I don't think the median reader understands just how much. Every storyline, every villain has a statement to make about trauma. And here, with the 9, we see that there are predators who prey specifically on people who have been traumatized, on people who are isolated because of their trauma. I want to hammer this point in. The Undersiders are vulnerable because they've been isolated from the rest of the city's villains. They've been isolated because they've been working for Coil, who threw them under the bus. The reason they were working for Coil is because they all come from extremely abusive backgrounds. Remember that Lisa's first interaction with Coil was having one of his goons beat her so hard that she couldn't breathe, then put her on the phone with Coil, who basically announced that she would be working for him. Lisa could have escaped if she wanted, but she didn't. Most Undersiders think that it's normal to have the person who has the most power over them not care about them at all. It isn't normal, and it leads them to being at the mercy of predators like the 9. So what do predators like this do? They position themselves so they have all of the power where you have none. I want to make this clear. We're talking about social power. When I think about the bullies I encountered in my life, their power was rarely physical. Think about Emma and Sophia. The reason they can abuse Taylor is because they're pretty and people like them. The author communicates something about just how important connections are. This is why Jack isn't all powerful. His power comes from his ability to make friends. Taylor thinks that she could kill him on the spot with her bugs, but she knows that if she does, Siberian will kill her and the rest of the Undersiders on the spot. In a similar manner, Jack is pretty good at reading people himself, but he's even better at it with Cherish by his side. Cherish, in this context, really makes you feel what it's like to be an abuse victim faced with an experienced predator. Whatever moves the victim thinks of, the predator sees them coming from a mile away. As soon as the members of the 9 enter, Taylor starts doing what she does best, which is to look for solutions. Cherish picks up on that fast and says this. What's this? Someone thinks she'd had a clever idea. A bit of hope and inspiration there. Who? Jack asked. When I looked at her with my power before, I called her the Worm. She spent some time being as low on the food chain as you can get while still being able to move under her own power. As low as someone can get while still having an identity of their own. But she's realized she's poisonous, dangerous in her own unique way. She's useful like a silkworm we harvest or an earthworm who works our gardens. She's even realized that she's not alone so long as she looks for friends among other dirty, contemptible creatures. Speaking of which, I forgot to say hi, little brother. Fuck you, Sherry. Cherish smiled and stared at me. The little worm found a nugget of self-worth. She just doesn't want to look too closely at what that nugget is made of. If she's lucky, she's one of the worms without eyes. They might be keenly aware of their environment, but they're happier blind. So what did we just see here? First, Cherish seems to know Taylor better than she knows herself, and the reader gets to see how vulnerable it feels. Secondly, we are naturally given more information about Taylor, this idea of finding value while still seeing yourself as lowly, and of course the concept of blindness that's going to only increase in importance the further we go into the story. As I'm sure you've noticed, there's a really interesting word choice in Cherish's speech, a word that Cherish uses to describe Taylor. I'm speaking, of course, of the word contemptible. I mean, what did you think I was talking about? Contemptible reminds the reader of a line from William Blake's Proverbs of Hell, which we read together on the second video. As the air to a bird or the sea to a fish, so is contempt to the contemptible. Which means, I think, that people who are used to living under contempt just accept it as normal. It might be an intentional reference, it might not be, but I really like the way it fits here. Cherish might be projecting when she talks about the lowly worm. At the very least, Cherish is an interesting foil to Taylor because even though Cherish is a predator, she's also a victim. Like Taylor, she's used to being abused. But unlike the Undersiders who were trapped by the Nine, Cherish sought the Nine specifically. She was aiming to recreate the conditions of her childhood using the pretty flimsy excuse of wanting to take revenge on Alec or get away from her family. She could have just moved to Mexico or France or some shit. Seriously, they've been torturing her for days, made her tattoo her body with the most disgusting, unsexy stuff possible, and I'm supposed to believe it was worth it for her just to get back at Alec? She wanted this. Remember how flattered Cherish was in her interlude when an aging soldier called her pretty. Being attractive was really important to her. If you've ever had friends in abusive relationships, you know what it's like to have them put up with the most insane shit and try to convince you that it's normal. And they're right, to them it is normal. To Cherish, going back to this dynamic isn't just familiar, it's familial. This is what karma is about. You get used to doing things. This is why Mannequin doesn't hold Cherish down and tattoo her himself. He makes her choose the design and force the artists to do it to her. Cherish wanted to be in this environment, but didn't just want to be abused, she wanted to win. Like Taylor, she didn't just learn to take abuse, she learned that in this world you either take the abuse or give it. This is what we call a switch. Taylor wants to gain more power to make the world better, but Cherish just wants control. When Cherish narrates about getting the Nine addicted to her, she doesn't talk about utilizing them for her own goals or getting them to stop killing people. Her goal ends with controlling the Nine and becoming, I quote, one of the most dangerous people in the world. That's it. If she can't impress Daddy, she's going to become Daddy. Cherish is unbelievably complex for a side character. You could write a whole novella about her easily. Running away from Heartbreaker, being hunted down, killing Hatchet-Face to join the Nine, being tortured by the Nine, and finally ending on the twist that she's been manipulating the Nine this entire time with a subtle use of her power. It would be a strange book with a very unrelatable protagonist, but I've read and enjoyed way weirder things. The author crams all of this backstory into Cherish's interactions with other people, so that now he can capitalize on all of that momentum without losing any time gaining it. Lisa, trying to impress Jack, tells him about Cherish's plan, which is a really cool way to incorporate the narrative. But the author once again adds another layer of complexity on top of that, because why not? Jack has already known about Cherish's plan and had his own plan in the works in order to counter her power. Specifically to have Bonesaw tinker with his nerves so that Cherish's power won't work on him. Now, I don't think this would work biologically. Even if Bonesaw could replace all of Jack's nerves, which includes his brain, Cherish would notice that her little pushes and pulls aren't working. She'd also notice that every time Jack looks at her, he feels excited anticipation to see her hope crushed, the same excitement that he has for Theo. Jack says that this was exactly the point, that he wanted to see how long they could keep the act before she'd notice, but I really don't think someone so impulsive could control their own feelings that way. But I'm not here to nitpick. I'm here to learn how to write engaging narratives. The thing that makes Worms so engaging, for me, is how deeply it delves into the human psyche and social phenomena. In order to accomplish that, Worms' plot is written around people's deep urges. You could write a superhero novel where everyone is just rationally trying to maximize their own survival, but it wouldn't be nearly as memorable. Worm is built on the idea that every single cape would be better off staying at home, but they keep diving into danger. Why? Because they want to. Jack wanted deeply to see Cherish's face as she tried to pull her biggest move and failed, and Lisa took that from him. His anger here is real. It's not just that he wants to crush Lisa's hope. He's genuinely furious with her and he lashes out, cutting her mouth open before we even understand what had happened. Taylor first comments on the spray of blood that lands on her lenses, blinding her. As soon as she understands Lisa is wounded, she kneels on the floor and tries to stop the bleeding with her hands, which causes Lisa even more pain. All the while, Lisa is gesturing for someone to give her a pen and paper, which she uses to write one word: deal. This is one of my favorite moments in the entire book, one of my favorite moments in literature ever. It breaks my heart. It's so beautiful that there's a part of me that doesn't really want to analyze it. But we're here to analyze, so let's ask the most basic question. What's going on? First of all, there's the gratuitous violence of it. There's something so refreshing and shocking every time that the author makes the decision to actually go that far. Furthermore, the feeling of danger and thrill in Worm is fueled by these moments where things actually go really bad. Because you know things can go really bad, it's so much more gratifying when they don't. Second, this is the heart of what Wildbow wanted to share with you, that feeling of intense suffering that is made that much worse by the knowledge that someone else did this to you because they felt like it. Third is the recreation of trauma. This is the most violent way that someone shuts Lisa up so far. It was at this point during my third read that I realized what the meaning of her name was. Who gives a shit about Elizabeth? Depending on the accent, Lisa just sounds like listen, imperative, as if she were saying Lisa to me. Which nobody does because her trauma makes her such an annoying know-it-all, just like me. Lisa wants to be listened to be the one saying the smart thing, but she's making others shut her up more forcefully and more painfully each time. The fourth thing that makes this beautiful is that she's not alone in this. Taylor is trying to help her, and it doesn't matter that she can't do anything. The thing that makes my heart sing is that Taylor drops everything to help Lisa, that Lisa is not alone in her suffering. And she's even less alone because she gets to do the best thing you can do when you're suffering, trying to help someone you love. No homo. But how does Lisa try? Like her interaction with Purity, the thing that lets Lisa manipulate Jack is that she understands his perspective and accepts that perspective. I don't think this is something that Brian, Bitch, or Alec would have been capable of doing, even if they had Lisa's powers. I think their egos would have forced them to resist and rebel. Lisa plays the game, but whatever process she's going through is in the background. The reader's eyes are on Taylor, who tries to understand what the hell Lisa is getting at one scribbled note at a time, until she finally comes up with a proposition for Jack. Instead of each candidate just trying to survive, the candidates are going to have a common goal. If more than half survive, the 9 lose and leave Brockton Bay. Notice that once again, Taylor is trying to make everyone work together. Jack is amused by this and so agrees, saying that he will bestow upon them the details later. When you try to understand a scene, it can really help to find similar scenes and compare them. As I've said before, the 9 position themselves as gods over their victims, so I tried to find another scene that depicts a struggle against being so unfairly superior. I found one scene like that, and as you might have guessed, I found it in the Old Testament. So, Genesis 18, God tells Abraham that he's going to destroy the city of Sodom. Abraham's nephew Lot lives in Sodom, and so Abraham naturally prefers that the city won't be destroyed. So what does he do? He haggles, but he haggles in a smart way. He understands that God's values are different from his own and argues from that perspective. Knowing that God wants to destroy Sodom because the people there are wicked, Abraham frames this as an issue of morality, even though Abraham himself only cares about saving his own family. He starts with a question. What if Sodom had 50 righteous people? Would you still destroy it? God says that no, if there were 50 righteous people in Sodom, he wouldn't destroy it. Abraham reminds God that Abraham himself is nothing but dust and ashes, then asks what about 45 righteous people? God says that he won't destroy Sodom if there are 45 righteous people in it, and so on, until Honest Abe manages to bring God down to 10 righteous people. There aren't 10 righteous people in Sodom, but this haggling paves the way for Abraham to convince God to test Lot, and after Lot passes the test, God allows him to escape. There are 2 really interesting lessons from this. One is that when you're arguing with a god, you should see things from their perspective. 2 is that you can use karma against God. Why does Abraham start with 50 people and then slowly bring the number down? To get God in the habit of agreeing. Side note, the Bible is fucking weird, man. So Taylor got out of the situation by haggling. There are many ways in which Taylor is similar to Abraham. She, too, lowers herself when faced with a stronger entity and is perfectly unhesitant when it comes to making sacrifices. There's also another Abraham-like thing she's going to do later in the story. Before he leaves, Jack warns the Travelsiders that Shatterbird is going to shatter all over the city, including Taylor's dad's home. As soon as Jack leaves, Lisa urges Taylor to go help her dad. "Go," she says, Taylor's finger is still in her mouth. "Go!" This is a heroic Lisa moment. Taylor is worried that Lisa's blood loss might be fatal, and I'm sure that Lisa can feel it. She's terrified, and Taylor is her only friend. Lisa would really rather Taylor stay with her, but she tells her to go. The reader knows all of this, but we don't have time to process what we're seeing because it's communicated in such an effective way. This interaction between Lisa and Taylor is accompanied by a whole dialogue that's happening in the background between Jack, Cherish, and Bonesaw. A plot-relevant, information-dense dialogue that could have carried an entire scene by itself. When I say that I was disappointed by reading Wildbow's other works, this is what I'm talking about. Pact, Pale, and Claw are brilliant in their own ways, but I was missing this insane density that Worm has. That makes me think that writing scenes like the one we just went over takes a lot of work, and I don't know if Wildbow felt like it was worth it. Anyway, Taylor runs to her dad to save him before all of the glass in the city explodes. In the video about leadership, I accused Taylor of only caring about her masked career, but here she puts her father first. This is something that can only be explained under the trusting interpretation. Taylor is a good human being, and she honors thy father and mother. I could try and claim that she's trying to signal to the Undersiders what a good person she is, but none of them care. Staying and applying pressure to Lisa's wound would have gotten her more credit both with them and with Coil. Anyway, Taylor runs as fast as she can, using her power to warn people along the way. Because she's a good person, I guess. Again, comparing Worm to Wildbow's other works, another advantage of Worm is that every scene develops some through-line, some progression, aside from the immediate plot. So, while Taylor runs, she expands her capacity for multitasking, solving hundreds of different problems at the same time, something a human brain is incapable of. When she directs tens of thousands of different bugs to hundreds of different rooms, who is doing the problem solving? As soon as Taylor's close enough to her home that she can use her power, she collapses and uses her bugs to help her dad as much as she can. Taylor's power gives her a wide area of perception, and so when the glass finally explodes, Taylor can feel through her bugs how the breaking of the glass progresses like a wave. This again hints that Shatterbird's power is sound-based, but it also makes it feel so real. Despite Taylor's efforts, Danny is badly hurt. The paramedics arrive way too fast, and Taylor realizes their call is people. They bring Danny up to the ambulance, and Taylor, tears in her eyes, leaves because she needs to take care of her territory and/or impress Coil. She goes to her territory and tries to get her injured people to take care of one another, but when she gives out commands, nobody listens to her. Again, this develops the statement about the difficulties of cooperation. Remember that Charlotte didn't trust Taylor until she saw Sierra shake Taylor's hand, and now Charlotte is the first one that steps up and asks Taylor what to do, socially pressuring others to do the same. This is a scene that I have to skim, but there's one character here that I really like, a gray-haired doctor that fucking hates Taylor just because she's a villain, scolding Taylor for giving her peroxide because nobody uses it as a disinfectant anymore. Instantly, the reader feels that this is a character that's going to stay for a while. A character we're going to grow to love and respect. And then she's dead. Boom. Trauma. So, seeing that Taylor is actually trying to improve things, Mannequin decides to try and squash that hope, starting first and foremost by killing the paramedics that were trying to help people. Taylor snarls at him that she's going to make sure he regrets doing that, even if she doesn't know how. When people ask me what to read after Worm, I ask them what was their favorite moment. If this is your favorite moment in Worm, you should probably read A Practical Guide to Evil, because it's a really fun book about a teenage villain kicking ass against all odds. Also, it has the coolest magic system I've ever seen in any book. However, if your favorite moment in Worm is Lisa being miserable and wounded and reaching out to Taylor, you should probably read Sadie by Courtney Summers. Both of them were written by people who have studied Worm, I'm almost certain, but Sadie is a book made of condensed trauma, and it will fuck you up. Apply judgment. Anyway, Taylor and Mannequin fight. Amazing scene because there's a lot of stuff progressing at the same time. First of all, the mystery of his power keeps the reader engaged. How can he avoid her bugs? How can he see without eyes? Mannequin beats the shit out of Taylor, and the fact that she doesn't down the first punch makes me think he's toying with her. We'll soon see him outrun bitches and shoot bullets out of his arms. If he wanted to make a body that could knock Taylor out from the other side of the room, he could have. This is also how I read the fact that he tries to slit her throat and doesn't notice that he failed because of the spider silk. The fact that he avoids the bugs means that he either senses reality through very sensitive hearing or through some sort of heat sensation. If it's sound, he would have heard Taylor's heart still beating in her chest. If it's heat, he would have seen the puddle of blood or lack thereof. I think he hoped that she would keep pretending to be dead while he murdered her people, thus instilling in her the karma of giving up. But she doesn't. As soon as he starts attacking bystanders, she gets up and fights him again, all the while using her bugs to shove spider silk into his machinery. Eventually, she airdrops paint from her hideout onto his joints, gunking up his mobility. This scene also develops the through line of Taylor pushing through physical pain. The cascade here isn't about the pain that Taylor endures, but about how much she can do while in pain. After being hit with Bakuda's pain bomb, she was barely conscious when cutting off Bakuda's toes. During Leviathan, she was more lucid as she picked up the halberd, ignoring the pain in her broken shoulder. Against Mannequin, she keeps attacking even though he beats her down every time, and all the while she invents a whole new strategy on the fly, pun intended. Hey, I know who I am. She spends conscious energy trying to see the world through his perspective and thinks about how she'd prepare if she were him. She can think more while her body's in pain. Everything that the characters can do in Worm is developed gradually. Even Taylor's ability to use the bugs to airdrop is introduced earlier in this scene where she uses a combination of arachnids and flying bugs to airdrop peroxide for the gray-haired doctor. Rest in peace, Queen. Eventually, Taylor drops enough viscous fluids into Mannequin's elbows that he forfeits the fight, leaving his head behind. Taylor goes home, sleeps very little, and wakes up to find her minions in the kitchen. There is a very important scene here. Taylor is ashamed of how weak and wounded she is, while Sierra and Charlotte can barely look her in the eyes. Either because she's so competent it's terrifying, or because they feel ashamed at how much she's suffered for them. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it's not because they think that Taylor, who just defeated a world-renowned villain, is weak. Remember the blind worm from Cherish's speech? Remember how much we talked about madness, defining it as an inability to see other perspectives. Trauma makes it harder for you to see other people's perspectives, especially when it comes to how they see you. Taylor can try to think like Mannequin when it comes to strategy, but it's hard for her to imagine Sierra and Charlotte seeing her as anything but contemptible. Yes, you in the back. Yeah, Taylor's problem here isn't that she's weak. She expects Sierra and Charlotte to look down on her because she feels guilty for the people Mannequin killed. Yes, true, but I feel like that's the same thing. Blaming yourself for not being able to stop an experienced mass murderer doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Doesn't it? In the leadership video, we talked about how we can interpret Taylor as helping her territory solely for herself and her plan to get Dean on her side. The reason that Mannequin attacked this specific territory was because they were doing better than the others. And they were doing better than the others because Taylor was trying to progress her own selfish goals. Assuming Taylor is subconsciously aware of her own motivation, wouldn't it make sense for her to feel guilty about it? Damn. Could be. Next. Brian comes over to visit, and because Taylor is a good person, the first thing she asks him is whether Lisa and her father are okay. He tells her that they are, but expresses a sort of amazement at how little Lisa cares about her injury. She seems to have completely brushed it off. Is it sexist? Brian asked, to wonder why a girl doesn't care more about her looks being spoiled. The perspective clash is intense. It's obvious for both the reader and Taylor that Lisa is reeling from the magnitude of the abuse that she's been given. From the fact that she will carry this scar forever, probably, just because Jack felt like cutting her. Her only defense is to hide behind a winning smile. I get why some people don't like Brian. Compared to Taylor and Lisa's abilities of seeing different perspectives, he feels underdeveloped. It's almost childish of him to see Lisa winking and cracking jokes and think that this is what she's actually feeling. This reminds me of what it felt like to see things from Bitch's perspective and realize that she has no clue how people think and behave. Brian, of course, was given much more of a chance than Bitch. His father may have been emotionally neglectful, maybe even abusive, but I think he genuinely tried to teach Brian how to be a man. More importantly, he was there. Now let's compare Brian to Taylor. Brian's dad taught him how to box, but never really talked to him. His mother was very busy courting the attention of shitty stepfathers and getting high. On the other hand, Taylor's mom sat with her reading Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, a novel about the importance of understanding other perspectives, and discussed it with her. In a much broader sense, novels are a tool to practice seeing another person's perspective. But it's not just about reading books. The amount of attention a baby gets in the first 2 years of their life is crucial to their ability to socialize later on. Up until her mother's death, Taylor had 2 responsible, emotionally available parents. Brian's parents were both too busy coping to practice bonding with him. Can we blame him for having an underdeveloped ability to connect with others? For me, Brian is still less likable than the other characters because I like competent and mature people, even if that's unfair. But by the end of this video, I'll be able to explain why he'll always have a warm place in my heart. In a meeting in Coil's lair, they read the rules of the game, handed down to them by Jack. And by deciding on the rules of the game, Jack turns the narrative into a meta-narrative. This is something that comes up often in Wildbow's works, an in-world element dictating some arbitrary rules. This allows the author to introduce characters of very different power levels without having them murder one another right away. Usually when people talk about Worm being a meta-narrative, they talk about stuff that comes later, but I say it actually starts here. Yes, you're in the back again. You say that the meta-narrative starts here, but why here? Is that so different from the cops and robbers stuff that we had before? What? That's not even remotely the same. Isn't it? Now it's Jack and the Nine enforcing the rules, but before it was society. Victoria was forbidden from breaking people's bones for PR reasons, and so she could only do it in places hidden from sight, like inside the bank. Yeah, I don't know about this one. I feel like Wildbow's other books have an element of the characters taking advantage of the meta-narrative. Sure, but Worm has that too. In The Banquet, Lisa and Alec take advantage of PR in order to escape. The only reason the Outsiders don't get punished for hijacking Sophia is that the PRT doesn't want people to know that it's possible. In fact, the entirety of the Weaver arc is about public image. No spoilers, please. There's definitely a complexity that emerges from arbitrary societal rules, but I think the Nine take it to a new level. I also think that this is intended to be symbolic. During the Nine arc, the protagonists are trying to survive under rules that are unreasonable, which is what it feels like when a victim of abuse finds himself at the mercy of predators making increasingly insane demands. Anyway, Lisa lets Taylor know that Amy has been spotted near a public shelter, which is odd, and convinces Taylor to go talk to her. Taylor goes, riding one of Bitch's dogs alongside Bitch and Gru. They find and approach Amy, who whines constantly, even accusing Taylor of making the situation worse while doing nothing to help. Her insufferable complaining is the opposite of everything that makes Taylor likable. Taylor never feels sorry for herself and always tries to see what she can do about the situation. Even when Mannequin kills people in her territory, Taylor blames herself for it. Amy, on the other hand, complains about Taylor asking her to carry a bigger burden by helping her fight the Nine, and before Taylor can retort, Mannequin arrives out of nowhere and brutalizes all 4 of them, impaling Amy's hand against a wall, hanging Taylor by the neck, killing one of Bitch's dogs with his new shotgun hands, and finally hitting Bitch and Brian with some shrapnel. After he leaves, Amy complains that Taylor allegedly led him right to her and runs away. Her refusal to take responsibility is infuriating. At the very least, Amy could have offered to heal Taylor so that she could do more damage to the Nine. But she doesn't, and by God, that makes me hate her even more than the non-con stuff. In case you don't remember, in the last video we discovered that Amy can just touch somebody and make them helplessly in love with her. That's a much stronger tool of control than what Cherish was hoping to use on the Nine, and Amy can do it in a single second. The Undersiders are planning on using Alec's power on either Shatterbird or Burnskar, and they already know it's going to be a whole operation because Alec can't hijack people if they're unconscious. Amy can. If Taylor had Amy's power, she'd already be thinking of a way to trick the Nine into kidnapping her so that she could use her power on Jack and mind control him and the rest of the Nine. But Amy doesn't even try to help. Why doesn't she try to help? When Taylor suggests some pact of mutual aid, Amy says, "I don't know if my conscience can handle taking that final step over to the dark side." Amy is afraid of what siding with the undersiders will say about her. She isn't thinking about the people in Brockton Bay, she's thinking about her public image. She doesn't trust herself to do what's right, so she relies on what other people will think of her. This is one of the most interesting ways in which Amy is a foil to Taylor, because Taylor, even when she thinks of herself as ugly and awkward and expects everyone to hate her, still relies on her own moral compass. Amy, on the other hand, relies on other people's opinions to dictate what's right and wrong for her. Why? Again, early development comes to mind. Amy grew up with a single mother, a woman with such bad judgment that she got knocked up by a supervillain. Later, Amy was transferred to Marquise's care, who probably did his best, but wasn't exactly experienced, then to Carol and Mark, who tried their best to love her and failed. Emotionally speaking, Amy was not made to feel safe, nor was she provided any stable connections. Taylor, on the other hand, grew up with parents who loved her and cherished her opinion. They literally taught her that if she raises her hand in a university lecture, her opinion will be valued. The fact that Taylor's opinion is never swayed by social pressure is a big part of her heroism, but it's not to her credit any more than Amy's pathological guilt is her fault. Taylor's ability to think for herself comes into play morally, but also tactically. She's the first to realize that the reason Mannequin left her, Bitch, and Brian alone is because he wants to crush Taylor's hope by murdering more of her people. And so they ride the dogs back to her territory, where another fight ensues. So, a note about the fighting. You don't need me to tell you that the fight scenes in the 9 arc are some of the best ever written. Again, there's a lazy part of me that wants to say, it's too good to analyze, but that's never true. So what can we learn as writers from these fight scenes? Taylor fights Mannequin 3 times almost back to back. That sounds repetitive and boring, but it isn't. It's fucking great. Why? How? Because Mannequin mixes it up. After Taylor beats him once, he returns with shotguns in his arms, something that Taylor just barely pieces together from the fact that his forearms are slightly thicker than they were before. When she finally catches up to him in her territory, she finds him with his mouth open, surrounded by dead bodies, and the bugs that she directs towards him die almost instantly. When Bitch is knocked down by the gas, he doesn't shoot her, which lets Taylor deduce that the gas he's using is flammable. Taylor uses that against him to blow him up. The reader is just half a step behind Taylor as she figures this stuff out, and so the fights are always interesting. Also, because it's a mental challenge, Taylor's win feels earned. When Mannequin is lying on the ground and Brian picks up a cinder block to break his torso open, you feel like the Undersiders deserve to win. They earned it. And that's why it feels so unfair when Burnskar comes out of nowhere and saves Mannequin's life. Brian and Burnskar argue about the rules, but it doesn't really matter. Mannequin gives up, forfeits his turn, and so Taylor, Brian, and Bitch now have to fight Burnskar. When you argue with the people who make the rules, it doesn't matter how right you are. They can always change the rules. The result of this sequence is this feeling that Taylor could actually kill one of the 9, giving us hope, but also lets us feel what a bunch of nasty bastards the 9 are. Burnskar could easily kill the trio if she wanted to, but that's not what she wants. What she wants is for Bitch to kill Brian and Taylor. This scene is made so much stronger because of Bitch's interlude. We know Bitch never learned to bond with humans, but she still has the need for human connection, and Taylor is the closest she ever got to that kind of connection. And Burnskar is trying to get her to give that up. Again, Cherish's power is utilized so beautifully to intertwine the interpersonal drama into the action. Because Cherish has a read on both Taylor and Bitch's emotions, Burnskar can inform the both of them that the friendship is dying. And, of course, because this is the densest story ever written, when Burnskar calls Bitch's social life depressingly lame, she sounds hollow, reminding Taylor of Sophia. Because we've seen Mimi at her best in Elle's interlude, we can appreciate Burnskar for all of her tragic beauty. She isn't just being horrible, she's trying to escape a horror deep within herself. A horror named guilt. I think Mimi needs Bitch to kill her friends to validate her own shitty choices. When Bitch eventually refuses Burnskar's offer, it seems to be more out of spite than any faith in Taylor becoming her friend. All throughout the day, Bitch has been extremely suspicious of Taylor and saw any assistance on Taylor's part as an attempt to manipulate her. I agree with Bitch on this. In Taylor's narration, there is no consideration of Bitch's emotional state or how much pain she's going through. only what Taylor needs to do to make Bitch cooperate. I'm not judging Taylor for this, just saying that her attempts to help Bitch are, in the most technical sense of the word, conscious attempts to manipulate Bitch's emotions. Eventually, Brian and Taylor escape to get into Taylor's hideout and deal with a whole bunch of minion-related problems that I'm not getting into. When they finally have a moment of quiet, Taylor, burned, bruised, and abused, breaks down. She can't take it anymore. The utter defeat of it, the unfairness, the humiliation. She tells Brian that she's going to go out and fight Burnscar. When he tells her that she can't win, she ignores him and speaks of her emotions instead. How the Nine are just bullies, and how somebody needs to stop them. Against all strategic sense, against all reason, she wants to go out there and fight the Nine alone. Remember when I talked about that scene in Atlanta where Earn is harassed until he initiates a fight with someone much stronger than him? It's this moment here that made me think about that, with Taylor being the one baited into initiating a losing fight. The difference is that none of Earn's friends is close enough or brave enough to give him a hug and calm him down. But Brian is brave enough, and so when he sees Taylor acting self-destructively, he steps in, physically stops her, and tells her not to go. And here, this moment, this is what got me convinced that the Nine arc is about the power of friendship. Straight up. This is the moment I wanted to finish this essay with, this perfect imperfect friendship. Brian and Taylor aren't good friends. They're both too damaged to be vulnerable with one another, and they don't know each other very well. But, and this is a huge but, bigger than even your mama's, even though the connection is so frail, Brian can still be there for Taylor when she needs him as a friend. Brian stops Taylor with his body. Even though he's more hurt than she is, he physically holds her down in something that almost looks like a hug and says, "You're so hurt you can barely walk. If they find you, you won't be able to run." She retorts with, "Sick of running." I love that she sounds like bitch here, the same omission of the word I. Is this how bitch feels about the whole world? As if she's surrounded by bullies and her only reprieve is sheer spite? As Brian hugs her, Taylor cries a little, blaming her contact lenses. Both of them don't really know how to do this. His hug is too tight, he's touching her on one of the burns, and he's unaware of how awkward she feels as she remembers that one time that she confessed her feelings for him. But he's still there, and that means the world. A version of Worm in which Brian isn't there for Taylor is a version I wouldn't want to read, because the fact that he is there, the fact that she does receive this hug, this primate gesture, makes all the difference. Quoting my own brother's suicide note, "Learn to hug people. It helps their self-esteem." And this is what Taylor needs, to feel a little less like a contemptible worm and more like a person who deserves to survive. This is what brings her out of the pit of despair enough that she considers alternatives to suicide by Nine. She synthesizes something using both the rational part and the emotional part of her brain, an organized strategy to attack the Nine using all of the Travel-Siders and Coil's resources. The plan makes sense rationally. Jack's game revolves around incentivizing his victims to sit and wait, then surprise attack them. He isn't expecting a counterattack. The chances of the Travel-Siders winning are low, but much higher than trying to survive several rounds of being hunted down. For me, this is the most rational fake part of this book. Taylor comes with a solution that is counterintuitive but logical. But at the same time, this practical solution is very much informed by her desire to lash out and strike back. This is what makes Taylor's character so complicated. Her deep urges intermix with her rational thinking in a way that's hard to separate. And this is what human beings are. This is what you are. So, what do we do with this? Summary. The horror of the Nine is the horror of being transformed. How does Taylor resist the Nine's influence? I mean, Taylor does change. The Taylor that chooses to attack the Nine is much more badass than any Taylor we've seen before. She changes, but she doesn't change into what they want her to. In other words, she doesn't play their game. Suffering always changes you. The trick is to change into something that you will be proud of. This is the choice that's offered to people who go through abuse and suffering. They can take the easy way out and accept the abuse, condemning themselves to more. Or they can take the harder choice and grow into something new. When Cherish shows her tattoos, she's ashamed of what she chose to do to herself while playing along with the Nine. And that shame drives her to do worse and worse things, first and foremost to herself. Amy, Sophia, and Mimi are not far off. Their guilt, shame, and humiliation drive them to becoming even worse people. This is a foil to Taylor and the rest of the Undersiders. After finding out that she was an accomplice in the kidnapping of Dina, Taylor could have accepted she's a monster and doubled down, but she still tries to fix things. Bitch still tries to maintain her human connections. Brian tries to embody the healthy masculinity that he never got to experience. Every time I talk about a choice, I have to stop and clarify that I'm not placing all of the responsibility on the victim. It wouldn't be fair when choosing to grow as a person is so much easier when you have a loving family and friends that support you. Taylor probably had the best parents of any character in Worm, at least until the car accident. Brian had Taylor's honesty and kindness to lead him to be a little softer, a little kinder, and even Bitch was inspired by Taylor's efforts to connect one way or another. Also, Bitch made sure to surround herself with creatures that supported her with all of their hearts every single day, and I think that counts too. In the opening of No Country for Old Men, which is an amazing book, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell confesses that he knows that the Antichrist is out there, a real human being, and he won't face him because he's afraid of being changed. Taylor doesn't really seem to be aware of the fact that the Nine are trying to change her and her friends into worse people. But then again, people who are subjected to trauma aren't usually aware of all the ways they're being changed, nor do people in abusive relationships. When we see people make decisions that hurt them, it's so easy to blame them for their own self-destruction. But I don't care about blame. I care about understanding and helping. What should I do when I start to suspect a friend is in an abusive relationship? Do I call them an idiot and demand that they leave, or do I hug them, remind them of their worth, and tell them how wonderful they are to me? If they choose to play someone else's wicked game, a game that they're familiar with from a time when they didn't get to choose, my goal is to show them that there are other games out there, better games that they could play. Sometimes that means helping them understand how they got to playing these games in the first place. If trauma is the unexpected breaking of the narrative, then healing from trauma has to come from the understanding of our own narrative, the writing of our own story. But understanding isn't enough. Continuing my point from the last video, you have to forgive yourself, let go of your guilt, and the most important step, actually make the choice to do better. Friends can help, but the choice is ultimately yours, and it's not intellectual. I know people who understand their own trauma very well, but don't make the emotional, spiritual choice to start fixing their life. Usually because they don't have anyone to change for, or because they don't believe they do. Which is why it's so important that we learn to hug people. If you want to see the next videos in the series, please click on the link below and subscribe to the new channel. Huge thanks to my beautiful patrons, especially Zilch and Saran and Sang for their comments on this essay. Lately, we've been doing a microfiction challenge on the server where we write super short stories once a week and give each other critique as a way to get people into the habit of writing. If you're into that sort of thing, check out the link to my Patreon page below. Until next time, learn to hug people, you hear? It's important.